we can go ahead and mute everybody, and we're recording now. So welcome to tonight's virtual Civil War presentation brought to you by civilwartalk.com. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight, on almost the anniversary of the Richard Kirkland incident at Fredericksburg, our guest Laura Elliott will discuss the Angel of Maurice Heights in historiography and memory. This series is brought to you by civilwartalk.com, the American Civil War discussion forum. We are pleased to be able to bring these programs to you via the live virtual platform. And if you aren't already a member of Civil War Talk, we'll be providing information later on in the program on how to join. And I hope that you will all become a part of the Civil War Talk community. Our guest tonight is Laura Elliott, an independent historian whose primary research interest is the 16th Georgia Infantry of William T. Wofford's Brigade, McLaws Kershaw's Division, Longstreet's Corps, Army of Northern Virginia. Her research has gradually expanded to include all 4 brigades of this understudied division, and Laura lives in Rainbow City, Alabama, and hopes one day to utilize her 10+ years of research by writing a regimental history of the 16th Georgia Infantry or possibly a history of Wofford's Georgia Brigade. She also would like to eventually write a biography of Joseph B. Kershaw. And for now, though, she continues to enjoy her research. So please join me in welcoming my sister, Laura Elliott.
Thank you so much, Diane. That was a great welcome for my sister, and I appreciate you agreeing to do it. Like I said earlier, it's a little odd to be on the other side of the controls, so I'll try to adjust to that. I'm usually hosting these, and so
it's odd for me too.
So I'll try to make that adjustment. I really want to thank Civil War Talk for the opportunity to share this research with you tonight. To provide this presentation. Like I said earlier, the date just kind of popped up and it was empty. And so it seemed like a really, almost like fate that I should do the program tonight for you. As Diane alluded to in the introduction, I'm not a professional or an academic historian. I took some history classes in college and enjoyed those. And I've sort of always been interested in the Civil War ever since I was a kid. My great-great-grandfather was a surgeon in the Confederate Army. And so that really sparked my youthful interest in the war. But about 10 years ago, I guess, my interest really changed dramatically and intensified. And I became interested in not just what was already known about the war and its participants, but maybe things that weren't known, things that had either were little known or things that maybe had been forgotten. And so I wanted to do that research myself and find out some of those things. It's almost like a passion to me, the research phase of it. So luckily for me, I have had and continue to have some fantastic mentors, historians and collectors and authors who've shared their collections and research with me. They've inspired and motivated me, cheered me on, and encouraged me at times. And I see some of them are with us tonight. I'd love to list them by name here and let them know, thank them individually. But for now, I'll just say you guys know who you are. But you may not know how much I appreciate all the help you've given me in the past and that I hope you'll continue to give me as we move forward. Thanks so much for your help and encouragement. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. I'm going to share my slides with you. There you go. We're going to get started with that slide. So some of you may have already seen this first image. Here, Ron's favorite image, the unidentified member of Battery B, 5th U.S. Artillery. It's a soft image, classified as a soft image, hand-colored CDV of a handsome Federal artilleryman holding a regulation artillery saber, standing next to this distinctive table in front of this beautifully painted hand-painted backdrop. The collar on his shell jacket, you'll notice, has been cut down by the tailor for comfort, lowered, and it's a great image by itself. But you may be saying, but Battery B, 5th U.S. Artillery wasn't even at Fredericksburg. They were organized in November of 1862 at Fort Hamilton, New York Harbor. So they were hardly organized before the Battle of Fredericksburg occurred. But if you might wonder why I'm showing you this image, but I hope that you'll all stick with me till the end of this presentation so that I can let you see how it's connected to the Kirkland story. So this is Richard Rowland Kirkland of the 2nd South Carolina Infantry. Of course, he's best known as the Angel of Maurice Heights. Everybody's heard of that story. The Confederate soldier who risked his own life to aid wounded Federal soldiers between the lines at the Battle of Fredericksburg in December 13th, 1862. Kirkland was killed in action at Chickamauga on September 20th, 1863, so the second day of the battle there. He was 20 years old at the time he was killed, so he did not survive the war. So the Battle of Fredericksburg, you probably already know, that's where the Kirkland incident happened, right? The purpose of my presentation tonight is to examine the Kirkland story, not necessarily to detail the Battle of Fredericksburg, but I'll show you a couple of maps along the way so that you can kind of get your bearings on the field and understand where things happen. That said, though, if questions come to mind during the presentation about the battle itself or really anything else that we talk about, feel free to enter those in the chat box and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. So Kirkland's act of kindness, we said it happened at the Battle of Fredericksburg. In front of his brigade's position, Kershaw's brigade, which was positioned behind the stone wall in front of Maurice Heights to the left of Cobb's Georgians. The low ridge, you can see it here, low ridge known as Maurice Heights, was about 600 yards to the west of the main town of Fredericksburg that you see here in the foreground. It only rises about 40, 50, maybe 60 feet above the ground and the level of the ground in front of it. At the base of Maurice Heights, though, lays this telegraph road. And of course, after the war, it was known as the Sunken Road. This 4 to 4.5 foot tall stone wall, if you go there today, the wall will look much shorter, but at the time it was 4 to 4.5 feet tall, protected that position. And Lafayette McLaws, the division commander there, had 2 of his brigades, Cobb's Georgians, that was Thomas Reed Roots Cobb, not Howell Cobb. Howell Cobb was not there, but Thomas Reed Roots Cobb in command of his brigade. And he sent Kershaw there to reinforce that line. Massed artillery provided complete coverage of the plains in front of that wall. And you can see those plains that the Federals advanced across here a little bit here in the distance. Just imagine that what this ground would look like directly in front of the wall, because what you're actually seeing is pretty far away, but basically a level flat plain. So Kershaw's South Carolinians that included the 2nd South Carolina, of course, the regiment that Richard Kirkland was a member of, they were positioned to the left of Cobb's Georgians, I said that, and behind that stone wall. The best I can tell you about their position is that the 8th South Carolina memoirs and reminiscences say that the 8th South Carolina was the farthest to the left of that brigade, and that their left was anchored on what they described as a creek that debouched into the valley left of Kershaw's position. So I've highlighted this creek, assuming that this is it. Their line would have extended further over than what this is actually showing. So you can imagine, if you've been there before, you've seen that wall. So Kirkland's South Carolinians, which included the 2nd South Carolina, was positioned there to the left of Cobb's line. Artillery, you guys have probably heard this quote before, but I'm going to use it anyway. Edward Porter Alexander, commanding the Confederate artillery, assured Longstreet from the heights, General, we cover that ground now so well that we will comb it as with a fine-tooth comb. A chicken could not live on that field when we open on it. And sure enough, that's pretty much what happened. After the 6th charge was driven back, the Federals ended their assaults, leaving the ground over which they had charged covered with the bodies of their dead and, of course, the wounded. When the carnage of the day was over, the wounded on the field between the lines cried out for water. You probably all heard the story, but I'm going to run through it real quick anyway, just in case there's anybody with us who hasn't heard it. Basically, the story of the Angel of Maurice Heights goes like this. 19-year-old Sergeant Richard Rowland Kirkland, here on the right, hearing the cries of the wounded on the field, went to his Brigadier General Joseph Brevard Kershaw, and asked permission to go over the stone wall and take water to the wounded Federals, the ones closest to the wall. So one thing a lot of people don't know is that Kershaw was the original colonel of the 2nd South Carolina. So I think that it's safe to assume that Kershaw and Kirkland had a more of a close relationship than you would typically think of a brigadier general having with a sergeant in one of the regiments in his brigade. So Kershaw had actually commanded the 2nd South Carolina from its organization until he was promoted. At first, Kershaw tried to dissuade Kirkland, saying that he would certainly be killed. Kershaw was concerned because skirmish fire was still going on. In fact, some accounts classify the fire as substantial enough to be considered incessant and fatal. Kirkland told Kershaw that he could not bear to hear the groans and cries of the wounded, the anguish which met his ears. And if General Kershaw would just please permit it, he would cross the wall and relieve the suffering wounded. Kershaw, for those who haven't done much study of him, I've done quite a bit, and I would classify him as an ethical, upstanding man, sensitive, caring, took really good care of his men, and I would classify him as magnanimous. So Kirkland's appeal was too strong and Kershaw relented, Kirkland supposedly expressing a premonition that he would not be killed. He didn't think that he would be killed, even though Kershaw warned him that he might. He gathered up the canteens and bounded over the wall, but his appearance began to draw fire. Remember, I said skirmish fire was still going on. The Federals could see from their position as he entered the field over the wall, and I think that they probably assumed he was going onto the field to rifle the dead and wounded. So they began to fire on him. A volley of bullets, and yet he was unharmed. He went to the first wounded man and put a canteen to his lips, and the firing slackened. And then it ceased, allowing him to pass from one wounded Federal to another. So over the years, that's basically the story, but over the years, this particular article has been cited by most historians as the very first published report of the Kirkland incident. This one does not name Richard Rowland Kirkland specifically, but it's clear that it's referring to an enlisted man in Kershaw's brigade, in one of the regiments in Kershaw's brigade. The article is written under a pseudonym, C. McKay, and it was published in the Charleston News and Courier, January 23rd, 1880. Clearly talking about an enlisted man in one of Kershaw's regiments who went forward over the wall and supplied water. So once this article appeared, soon afterwards, Joseph B. Kershaw decided to respond. And his response was this article, which appeared in the Charleston News and Courier on January 29th, and provided the particulars, including the identity of the previously unnamed hero, Richard Rowland Kirkland. This particular one that I've used on the slide is a reprint in the Anderson Intelligencer. And so that article was actually reprinted in newspapers all over the country, north and south. And that description of Kershaw's act of kindness that was spread across the country in the newspaper, that narrative ultimately became the identity of Richard Rowland Kirkland, and it's how we know him today. So Kirkland's been memorialized in most every way you could ever imagine. This in 1910, local school children financed a memorial fountain that was erected in his honor in Camden, South Carolina. There's this beautiful monument, moving rendering of the Kirkland incident in front of the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg. And of course, my favorite, the emotional monument on the battlefield at Fredericksburg in the Sunken Road, behind the stone wall near the location where the incident occurred 159 years ago. Artists portrayed the Kirkland incident. Some sketches from the late 1800s and early 1900s. These appeared in newspapers whenever the story was reprinted or rehashed or discussed, brought up for discussion, sometimes on the anniversary of the event, sometimes at other times. National Tribune and different newspapers would print these kinds of sketches. And of course, more recently, you guys have probably already all seen these. Artists who paint Civil War subjects, most every one of them has painted his own rendering of Kirkland. And some of these are just a few. But this one, entitled An Act of Compassion by Don Stivers, in case you're curious, this is my favorite. And some friends of mine actually gave me a copy of this, which I have on my wall. And this is actually a photograph of that particular print. So I really like this one the best, I think, because it looks like Richard Rowland Kirkland. The person providing the canteen looks like the pictures that we have of Richard Rowland Kirkland the most to me. And I also like these Confederate soldiers that are peeking over the wall, watching the act of kindness occur. So that one is definitely my favorite. There's also a film. It's called If Your Enemy Thirsts, which what a great name that is. If Your Enemy Thirsts, The Angel of Maurice Heights. So all this historiography, and then in 2009, a historian named Michael Schaffner published a well-researched guest blog on Kevin Levine's blog site, Civil War Memory. And his article was entitled, Is the Richard Kirkland Story True? Like most people, I never questioned it or thought there was any question about whether it happened or whether Richard Rowland Kirkland was the man who performed that act of kindness. So in his blog, Schaffner cites several factors that led him to conclude that Kirkland, that the Kirkland story, as told by Joseph B. Kershaw, is likely a fictionalized exaggeration or generalization. First, there was a very long time between when the incident occurred and when Kershaw reported it. So the incident occurred in December of 1862, and it was not reported or published by Kershaw. It wasn't published anywhere until that one that I showed you a minute ago, the 1880 version. So that's 18 years. Schaffner also cites historical inaccuracies, lack of timely primary source corroboration, absence of mention in the official records, and Joseph Kershaw's use of flowery language as additional factors that led him to conclude that it could be fictionalized or exaggerated, that it either never happened or that it wasn't Kirkland. So soon afterwards, in 2010, a historian, Mac Wyckoff, responded, and his response provided a couple of earlier primary source accounts that he felt like corroborated Kershaw's version or supported it. First of all, Walt Whitman's had a memorandum dated January 21st of 1863. And then also he cited the memoirs of Colonel James R. Haygood of the 1st South Carolina. Neither of those sources names Richard Kirkland, but both describe a Confederate soldier who crosses the wall to provide water to the wounded between the lines. Now, Whitman, we know, was across the river providing aid to wounded Federals there at Stafford Heights. And Haygood, his 1st South Carolina, was assigned to Jenkins' brigade of Pickett's division. So unless Haygood happened to be visiting the Kershaw's line, he would have had to have a view. It would have to be before Pickett's division moved, and he would have had a view here. Here's the sunken wall. I mean, the sunken road and the stone wall here. And so he would have had to have a view from probably here on the left of Pickett's line in order to see that. Either that, or he would have had to be visiting Kershaw, which is not impossible, because Jenkins and Kershaw were the only two brigades of South Carolinians anywhere in the vicinity. So, it makes sense that they might visit each other. But anyway, neither one of those men we can definitely say was a direct witness. What neither of these historians knew, or if either Wyckoff or Schaffner knew about it, they did not cite this, so at least it doesn't seem that they knew, that there was a much earlier account written by a man who was in Kershaw's brigade. And here it is, January 18th, 1874, 6 years before Kershaw's version appeared in the Charleston News and Courier. From the Louisville Ledger, and I'll explain to you shortly why it's in the Louisville Ledger. And it was reprinted in the Daily Phoenix of Columbia, South Carolina newspaper. And it names Richard Rowland Kirkland. You can see here, Kirkland resolved. Kirkland, Sergeant Kirkland. So it identifies the person who performed the act of kindness. And I'm just going to read a little bit of it for you. A correspondent of the Louisville, Kentucky Ledger thus speaks of a picture which is being executed by Captain W.P. Hicks of this city, Columbia, because this is reprinted in Columbia. The figures will be life-size. The sudden death of Mr. Wern will not deter Captain Hicks, one of the finest and most famous portrait and landscape painters in the South, from carrying out his announced determination to undertake the execution of a great national work based on a historic incident which took place at the fierce battle of Fredericksburg. The incident is this: after the gallant charge of the National Irish Brigade upon the stone fence behind which a portion of General Kershaw's division of South Carolinians was posted, the ground was covered with the dead and dying. And when they retreated, both armies kept up a murderous sharpshooting upon each other. Sergeant Kirkland, one of the sharpshooters, stationed behind the stone wall, is the hero of the incident. He belongs to the 2nd South Carolina Infantry. And Hicks goes on to tell basically the same story that Joseph Kershaw told 6 years later. So who is this Captain W.P. Hicks of this article, who provided the information for this article, and who was going to paint a mural, I suppose, a large painting with life-size figures? Who is this man, W.P. Hicks? Well, William Preston Hicks. He's a portrait artist. He's enumerated on the 1860 U.S. Census for Laurens, South Carolina, the son of Edward Hicks, a carriage or coach maker. William Preston Hicks and his 3 brothers all enlisted in Captain B.C. Garlington's company, which became Company A of the 3rd South Carolina, which was also part of Kershaw's brigade. William P. Hicks was discharged February 13th, 1862, on a surgeon's certificate of disability for a fistula in his arm. So William Preston Hicks wouldn't have likely been present at the Battle of Fredericksburg. But his older brother, Edward Melville Hicks, served as a corporal and later sergeant major of the regiment, and 2 of his other brothers, the younger ones, Willis Dickey and Clarence Eugene, also served in Company A. Eugene was killed at Fredericksburg, so he did not survive the war, but William P. Hicks filed the claim for Eugene's pay in arrears on behalf of their father. So while William Preston Hicks was likely not a direct witness to the Kirkland incident, his brothers were, and 2 of them survived the war. So this Hicks, he was an artist and a very interesting man. In 1874, the 1874 newspaper article says that he was going to create a large mural or painting with life-size images to memorialize Kirkland's heroic act. But mainly he was a portrait artist. and he worked in photography, colorizing tintypes and CDVs, and he painted portraits. So prior to and after the war, William Preston Hicks was in partnership with a man named Richard Wern in downtown Columbia, South Carolina. The Wern and Hicks Photo Emporium, it was called at times. And this is one of their ferrotypes. They were partners in photography for 15 years, except for the time that Hicks was serving in the 3rd South Carolina. The firm of Wern and Hicks is not very well known. It hasn't been studied, and articles haven't been written about it like they have this man of Richmond, Maurice of Richmond, probably the most well-studied photographer, Civil War era photographer in the South. So it's not that well known, Wern and Hicks, but Richard Wern is probably the best known for the 1865 series of 19 images illustrating the destruction of Columbia. And the partnership is probably best known for this image on the right of Robert Smalls. And yes, that is the Robert Smalls who stole the Confederate steamer Planter in Charleston Harbor and sailed her and its crew to freedom. He was a post-war U.S. congressman from South Carolina. Like I mentioned about Reese, an individual could spend a lifetime studying the images of one photographer or studio. Wern and Hicks took photographs of all kinds of subjects, but I have selected mostly military images to show you tonight, just to show a few examples of their work and some of the back marks that they used. I'm personally trying to learn as much as I can about the studio props, backdrops, and even the table coverings that they used. You'll see in these images this baluster that's present in all 3 of these images with these Grecian urn style pickets. And these are present in a good number of their images. And each photography studio's props and backdrops and the things that they used in the studio are unique. You've probably seen balusters like these in other images, but they may not necessarily be the same proportions as these. And it's easy to compare them when you can put them side by side and expand, blow the images up. But the neatest thing, and Ron Coddington will probably agree with me, the neatest thing about Wern and Hicks, you see these columns like this one here in a lot of Civil War period photographs, but I've never seen another one that has the exact proportions of this one, for one thing. But the other thing is, I've never seen it. Can you see the shadow line here? I've never seen another one that was up off the ground on wheels. Can you see that wheel? You have to look pretty hard. There's a wheel right there. So they could roll this column around the studio and use it in different parts of the studio to take images all over the studio. So what about this William Preston Hicks? Well, in 1866, October of 1866, the Yorkville Inquirer reported a painting that William Preston Hicks was working on entitled "Women of the South Decorating the Graves of the Confederate Dead." And the Crescent Monthly reported completion of the painting in January of 1867. Unfortunately, no one knows where the painting is today, but here's a CDV of the painting, presumably taken there in the studio. It's reminiscent of William D. Washington's famous painting, The Burial of Latane, painted in 1864. Hicks's 1866 painting, of course, shows a similar composition. A family at graveside, an African-American man with a shovel. But in the background, you can see other widows and children here around other graves. And this row of columns that you can see just barely off in the distance, this image is at the South Carolina Library in Columbia. And the folks there say that these columns are reminiscent of the ones left by the destruction of the Millwood plantation, which is located just outside of Columbia. So it's clear that this was meant to convey an image of Columbia, South Carolina, mourning family there. So I know you're probably thinking, well, that's not that good of a painting. It's pretty crude, primitive. You classify it as a primitive painting, but he got better. Here's one you may not have seen before, or if you did, you had no idea who the artist was or that he was connected in any way to the Kirkland story. William Preston Hicks eventually developed into a very talented artist. He painted this fantastic 1873 portrait of Joseph B. Kershaw in the collection of the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, and the portrait of John S. Preston in the collection of the House Gallery Portraits at the South Carolina State House. He also is reported to have painted many others. I'll only mention a few. Major General Matthew Cowell Butler in 1871, a full-length portrait post-war of Beauregard, a full-length post-war of Loring, and a portrait of Beverly Nash, another South Carolina congressman. Unfortunately, I have not been able to locate any of these other works. The Wern and Hicks partnership ended suddenly in 1874 when Richard Wern took his own life. Following Wern's death, William Preston Hicks bought the other half of interest in the business and continued to operate the studio on his own. He took on apprentices and assistants. Afterwards, W.P. Hicks and Company was the name of the firm. After Wern's death, W.P. Hicks and Company continued to work in CDVs, cabinet cards, and stereographs while giving, quote, much attention to the tinting of photographs and to producing paintings in oil and watercolor. So here's just a few examples. William Preston Hicks went on to achieve great success in business, working in the development and sales of electrical service, including at least 6 years under this man that you might recognize, Thomas Alva Edison. Hicks moved to New York, where he built this lovely home along the shore in the township of Rye, and it's a beauty, but unfortunately is no longer there. It was torn down, I believe in the 1940s, maybe 50s. Hicks died there in New York in 1911. His wife and daughter Rose survived him and lived in that house I just showed you for quite a long time before they finally had to sell the property at auction when they were unable to pay the taxes and the upkeep. And I know I just told you he died in 1911, and you're looking at this tombstone and saying, nope, he died in 1912. But unless the New York Times printed his obituary a year early, which I don't think they would have, then he actually died in 1911. So he's buried there in Westchester County, New York. And of course, he died in 1911, not 1912. It's just a misprint on his tombstone. William Preston Hicks led a fascinating and sometimes quite challenging life, but it's possible that his most important contribution is unrelated to his art, his photography, his portraits, his success in business, or his association with Thomas Alva Edison. His account is the earliest source to name Richard Rowland Kirkland as the hero between the lines at the Battle of Fredericksburg. Hicks's account predates Kershaw's by 6 years. He had two brothers who survived the war and who likely witnessed the incident. Besides his brothers, Hicks was associated with veterans of Kershaw's brigade. We can infer that men who could have, should have, or would have known about the incident believed that it happened as Hicks described, and that Richard Rowland Kirkland was the person who performed the act of kindness. It was generally accepted as fact by the men of Kershaw's brigade. Certainly, his version lends credibility to other later reports, including Joseph B. Kershaw's 1880 account. It's my opinion that Hicks's account confirms that Richard Rowland Kirkland really was the hero we always knew him to be. And it provides the confirmation that I need to know that he deserved to be called the Angel of Maurice Heights. This monument here memorializes his selfless act at Fredericksburg, December of 1862. And I also would like to suggest that perhaps William Preston Hicks, Lorenz native, later a son of Columbia, should receive more recognition than he has up until this time. So at the beginning of the presentation, I promised you to connect the dots so that you could see how this colorized image of an unidentified artilleryman from Battery B of the 5th U.S. Artillery is connected to the Kirkland story. Battery B, 5th U.S., like I said, they weren't at Fredericksburg, but after the war, they were ordered to Columbia, South Carolina as part of the occupation force. Companies B and H of the 5th U.S. Artillery left Fort Monroe June 10, 1867 for Columbia, South Carolina, and remained there until February of 1868. The image is backmarked Wern and Hicks, and the backmark matches the ones used by Wern and Hicks between July 1866 and November 1868. So during the time between June 10th, 1867 and February 1868, when Battery B of the 5th U.S. Artillery was in Columbia, South Carolina, our unidentified handsome artilleryman had his portrait taken at the Wern and Hicks Photo Emporium, and William Preston Hicks colorized this image. Thank you all so much for your attention and your interest tonight. It was a pleasure to share this research with you. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. And I see we have some experts here with us tonight. So if there's anything that I can't answer, I bet we can find your answer. We can still find your answer.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was awesome. It looks like we already have a lot of questions in the chat box. Audience, if you have questions that you haven't entered yet, you can take this time to go ahead and enter them now. Or if you'd like to ask your question live, go ahead and raise your hand. And while y'all are doing that, I'm going to take just a moment to fill you in on what's happening over at Civil War Talk Discussion Forum. There's so much great content waiting for you there. There are over 126 different discussion threads now on Civil War Talk and more than 26,000 members. And there's new content being added every day. So it's super easy to join, and it's always free. So if you want to join, there's no cost at all. Just go to the site and sign up. There are ads. Since it's a free site, there are some ads, but if you want to get rid of those pesky Google ads, you can support Civil War Talk by purchasing a premium membership for as little as $12 a year. That's not much at all. So if you're not already a member, we hope that you'll, after we finish here, hop over to civilwartalk.com and join. And we hope we see you there really soon. So Laura, are you ready to answer those questions now? You're supposed to say yes.
You don't want to answer the questions for me? Sure, I'll be glad to. Let me unshare this and we'll go to the screen. Okay, I'm all set.
Okay, let's see. What time, David Elmore is asking, what time of day did Kirkland tend to the wounded? Was it evening, dark? How much light was there for the Union troops to see what efforts he was giving? That's a great question.
That's a great question, David. Thanks so much for asking it. The last assault ended around sunset, late in the afternoon. So you're implying, I think, that perhaps it was difficult to see onto the field, and you'd be right. because we know that Kirkland's act of kindness occurred after the last assault was repulsed. And so it would have been very late in the day, perhaps even as late as sundown or later.
Okay, and Robert Carlson noted that the male figure at the graveside in the painting that Hicks did had lost his left leg. I didn't notice that, so that's an interesting point there. Stephen Smith states that his paternal grandmother was related to the Gist of South Carolina, and he couldn't catch the full name and regiment of the Captain Gist whose portrait you showed. So could you please again show the picture or verbally pass on the captain's full name and regiment?
Absolutely. We'll go back and show that that slide, and I'll also pull up the slide that you asked about earlier, the William Preston Hicks painting, women decorating the graves of the Confederate dead, and take a look at that man that's missing a leg.
Okay. You gonna do that now, or?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and pull those up now.
Okay.
Let's see. So we want, Stephen wants to see Gist. There you go. There's Gist. William M. Gist of the 15th South Carolina. This CDV is in the collection of the American Civil War Museum. Obviously, you can see the watermark there. And it is, you can obtain a copy from them fairly easily if you're interested in having a copy yourself. William M. Gist, 15th South Carolina, killed in the Battle of Knoxville, Tennessee. If you don't know much about Knoxville, it was not good for the 15th South Carolina. And you know, they generalized a lot, so it's possible. It's actually possible that he was killed at Campbell Station because the South Carolinians suffered pretty much there at Campbell Station, which was just preceding the Battle of Knoxville. Fort Sanders, the assault on Fort Sanders, they weren't actually part of the assaulting force, which is why I say they probably, his death could have occurred at Campbell Station instead of actually at Knoxville.
I appreciate the info. But for
Sure.
the family, it's actually pronounced with a hard G. It's Gist.
Oh, Gist. Okay. Sorry about that. So this was donated by Mrs. Clark. You'll be able to read it better if you go to their website and pull the image up yourself. But it looks like Mrs. Clark Waring was the donor. The label's there on the image. All right. And the other image we wanted to look at was the women decorating the graves of the Confederate dead. The CDV of the painting. Of course, the painting was completed in 1867, kind of reminiscence of this William D. Washington burial of Latane as far as the composition. But you're right, he is missing a leg and he has a prosthesis there. The newspapers really commented on the figure of the woman. The newspaper articles, when the painting was, it was almost like an art review, I guess, that appeared in the newspapers and in the Crescent Monthly. And they were infatuated with the woman, the motion that he was able to show in the woman. And like I said, it looks fairly primitive to us and maybe a little bit crude of a painting, but he did improve over time here. Much improved. I just love that painting. I'll just leave it there. We'll just leave it up. I don't know if you can see while we're waiting to see if there's any more questions. I don't know if you noticed before, but you can see some action here in the background. I don't know if anybody noticed that. So just a dim glow of some battle engagement or activity happening here. I mean, it looks like Kershaw's above, on a level above that action that's happening. And also, I don't know if you noticed the field glasses in his hand, here in his right hand. And of course his sword hanging here. There's a wagon wheel here that's partially, it's not finished. It's not a finished part of the painting, and neither really is this battle action. I read a newspaper article. This painting was taken to Richmond. It was exhibited in the gallery there, and then also at a jewelry store in Columbia, Mr. Taylor's jewelry store. And then the painting was taken to Richmond, where it was on display for quite some time in Richmond. And when they displayed it in Richmond, they commented that the background was not yet finished. And so at that point, it's almost like he just went in and painted in these small details just so that it would have a background. You know, they commented that the background was plain and that it didn't even need all the detail of war going on in the background to make it spectacular. There was also discussion about whether Joseph Kershaw was too stiff in the painting. And some people may think that he looks very stiff or erect, but the articles in the newspaper went on to say that that veterans from Kershaw's brigade, that was how he stood, that he stood like very upright and with his shoulders back like that. So evidently this was characteristic of Kershaw's posture. I do think it's interesting that if you've ever seen that, I guess it's an etching of Kershaw. It's very similar to this painting, but what they've done is they've gone in and changed the buttons to match this. See how these buttons are offset? They're 3 on this side are higher than the 3 on that side. And they've gone in on that etching, and one version of the etching has the buttons level from side to side, and the next version, or another version that I've seen, has the right column slightly elevated. So pretty impactful painting to me anyway.
Bruno Passacantondo, sorry if I butchered your name. Did anyone else join Kirkland in his mission of mercy? With all the casualties, he could not have tended to all the soldiers, could he?
No, he couldn't have tended to all of them, and his intent was never to tend to all of them. I believe the Irish Brigade was on that end of the field, and there was an awful lot of valor exhibited by the men in those assaults. It was a difficult position to be in, to have to assault against an enforced position like that with all that artillery. And so there were a lot of accounts from the Confederates who were behind the wall, whether they were from Cobb's brigade or Kershaw's, commented on the valor of those men. And I think that may have had something to do with Kirkland's desire to aid those men. And they were there in front of the wall. Some of them made it up to 50, 60 yards from the wall. So they were close enough that he could have carried on a conversation with them and said, "Don't worry, I'm coming to help you. Let me just get permission." And so we don't really know how many men he intended to help or how many he did help. We just know that there was no way he could have helped them all. And Mr. Passacantondo, you're exactly right. There would be no way that he could have aided all of the men who were between the lines.
Kevin Best wants to know, was the mission of the sharpshooters like Sergeant Kirkland to kill wounded on the field, or would that be considered a war crime at the time?
I don't think it would have been considered a war crime. It's just not very ethical. And I can't imagine that Kershaw would have allowed anything like that to happen. It's just, once you study Kershaw enough to know his personality, it's sort of like Custer. Once you study enough to know their personality, you can kind of draw some suppositions, I guess, about them. And I cannot imagine that Joseph Kershaw would have allowed anything like that to happen. Now, if one of them picked up a weapon and tried to fire at somebody who was behind the line, or, you know, tried to fire at I mean, I think that there was a lot of honor in men at that time, both sides. And so I don't think, you know, that was not their mission. And I can't imagine it being allowed by Joseph B. Kershaw anyway, but I'm sure that it did happen at times. possibly, both sides engaged in that, but it was not their purpose. The
And,
sharpshooters basically acted as skirmishers. Sorry, I
that's
should have
okay.
said that. Basically, the sharpshooters acted as skirmishers for the most part, and they were sent out in front of the line.
And Bobby Dover wants to know if there are any contemporaneous letters or diaries that mention the Kirkland incident.
The Haygood memoirs that I talked about were published fairly early on. I want to say 1866, or they're not actually published. The family bound them together in like a family type, I don't know what you call it, like a memoir of Haygood. And then Rick Featherston sent me a reminiscence of his ancestor today, who was a member of Hood's Brigade. But that reminiscence was recorded by his daughter, I believe, when she was 10. So it would have been like 1920 something, I think, that she actually wrote it down. It's really too bad that his grandfather, Malachi Reeves, I believe was his name.
Reeves,
Malachi Reeves didn't write that down himself, and that it wasn't recorded sooner afterward, because had it been, then it would be, it would be definite proof that it happened. And it does name Kirkland, I believe. Did it not, Rick?
Yeah, it did. Dick Kirkland, he called him.
Yeah. So if it would be then it would be the first source that named Richard Rowland Kirkland, and that was from someone who could have been a witness.
Yeah, I put that post on the Civil War Talk. So
Thank you for that, Rick. I appreciate it.
And Bobby Dover has another question. Did any Union troops corroborate Hicks's or Kershaw's account?
You have Walt Whitman, who was serving as a nurse on the other side of the river, and his is actually his account is actually recorded January 23rd, 1863. So it is the earliest mention of the Kirkland incident. It does not name him. And so we can assume that someone who had been wounded came across to the hospital where Whitman was, perhaps, and relayed that story to Whitman, and he recorded it on January 23rd. Whitman probably wouldn't have been able to see from where he was. Like we talked about earlier, it was late afternoon, it was getting dark. He was on the other side of the river. It would have been difficult to see that far and even tell what was happening if he could have seen that far. So the chances that he actually witnessed the event are very slim, but it sounds like maybe one of the men who was wounded took that story with him and told it in the hospital, and Whitman recorded it.
Well, that's all the questions that we have in the chat box. There are a lot of comments and a lot of praise for you.
Oh, good. I think Mr. Carlson has a...
Yes, and Mr. Carlson has a live question, so we're going to ask him to unmute at this time.
I have to concur that the statue in front of the wall, I think, is superior to the one in Harrisburg, although both are very well done. And I also want to know, the other day, I sounded like I was breathing helium. Has that been corrected?
Yes, you sound normal today.
I updated my Zoom because I'm actually singing the tune about Christmas in the Trenches, about World War I, on a Zoom Friday. And I did not want to sound like I was consuming helium.
No, you sound great tonight.
But I consider this incident almost as remarkable as the Christmas in the Trenches truce in 1914. I mean, that I think is the most remarkable military occurrence ever. But the Kirkland incident also is amazing that he wasn't killed.
It is amazing. And he had that premonition that he would not be. He told his brigadier general that he would not be killed. Don't worry, I will not be killed. And that's recorded in William Preston Hicks's account, not necessarily in Joseph B. Kershaw or anybody else's account. William Preston Hicks says that was his premonition, that he would not be killed. So I think it's pretty fascinating. I think, you know, sometimes people today, we don't understand that honor between soldiers that occurred back then. And so I think that I'm gonna put you back on the screen since we're talking. Leave you here. I'm not sure who unspotlighted you. There you go. So I think that sometimes we don't understand the kinds of things that happen between soldiers, or that how many times there was a, I read an article not long ago, or so it was a newspaper article about a Union soldier who helped a Confederate soldier at Cedar Creek, you know, the reverse. So it was a victory for the Confederates in the morning and a defeat in the afternoon. And so this man helped a Confederate soldier, and he was trying to find out if the guy had lived or not. I think it happened more than we think. I mean, humans are humans, and once the bullets stop flying, you know, their human nature takes over, and people want to help each other and preserve life if they can help.
Yeah. And there were multiple instances, of course, where one Mason would help another.
Yes,
they'd make the sign of a Mason, and
yes,
that would prevent harm to them.
Right. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Stephen Smith has a question that he would like to ask live. I lost it there for a minute.
Yeah, I don't know how to do the yellow hand. In your research, it said that Kirkland was later killed at Chickamauga. Has your research been able to pin down on which day he bought it?
Yes, September 20th. He was actually mortally wounded on September 20th, and he refused to allow his comrades, his friends, to take him to a place of safety. In other words, he wasn't instantly killed. And so he refused aid from the other guys in his regiment who were nearby, who wanted to help him to a place of safety, and he died on the field alone. And the reminiscences say that it occurred on Horseshoe Ridge, which the South Carolinians were assaulting Horseshoe Ridge at the time. But there's some discrepancy over exactly where. Some people say, you know, near the South Carolina Monument. I don't know if you've been to Chickamauga before, but some folks say near the South Carolina Monument. And then, you know, there's that little depression, and then it goes back up. Some people say there. So somewhere along the path that Kershaw's brigade advanced, and of course, it was he was classified as a heroic soldier who did his part in every battle, not one to shirk duty, but always at the front, that kind of a soldier. His rifle, it's a 2-band infield, is on display at the Columbia State Museum of Military History, I think is the name of it. If somebody else knows the name of it, tell us the right name. But it's in Columbia, and it is there's a lot of military history there, and the rifle is actually in an 8x8 case, a glass case that sits on the floor, and so it's hanging from the ceiling of that glass case. And unfortunately, you can't where it is, you can't read the markings on it or really tell much about it. And I thought about calling them and asking them if they take it out of the case if I came back, but I haven't done that yet. Thanks for your question, Stephen.
Well, that looks like all the questions that we have tonight. If y'all think of anything else, you can certainly ask Laura questions on Civil War Talk. I'm sure she'd be glad to talk with you there about what she has going on. She has a lot of research that she does, and she's extremely knowledgeable about a lot of topics. Of course, I'm not prejudiced at all because she's my sister, you know. So
Diane, we have one more question. Larry.
Oh, okay.
DeMar.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. DeMar. I didn't see you there. Okay.
I was wondering where the title Angel of Mary's Heights came from. Who came up with that title and the story behind the monument at Fredericksburg? And is it in danger like some other Confederate monuments?
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry about that, Mr. DeMar. The Angel of Maurice Heights is a moniker that evolved over time. I would say it was used in the newspaper quite a bit, beginning not in these first few newspaper articles that I showed you tonight, but in some later articles, it was used as a nickname for Richard Rowland Kirkland, beginning, I'd say, in the it would be after Joseph B. Kershaw's account appeared, so late 1880s, early 1890s type thing. And of course, the monument on the field, the money that was raised for it was raised primarily by a group of people who organized. Some of his descendants organized a group of people who raised the money for that monument. And I wouldn't classify it as endangered unless the situation were to change. And you know, at this point, I believe that monuments that are on the battlefields, at this point at least, hopefully are going to be staying there. If the situation changed and that were to happen, I feel certain that it would not go into a scrap heap.
Good.
I don't think that would I don't think that group of people would allow that to happen. The people who raised the money for it. I hope not anyway.
Mr. Carlson, did you have another question?
I believe the name of the museum in Columbia is Civil War History and Relic Museum. And
That's it. That's it. Thank you so much.
I spent a whole day with the curator there once and wanted to make off with the Berdan sharpshooter backpack, but
they wouldn't let you.
And I have a good friend in the American Society of Arms Collectors who's always taunting me about the War of Northern Aggression. I pull out the green card to the CSA, which he gave me at the museum that day, that says I renounced all ideation of Yankeedom, and it goes on and on. It's really great. So I remember well my visit there.
Yeah, they have a lot of South Carolina military history there, and that rifle is one that I would certainly like to see up close one day.
Fantastic museum. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, okay. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for joining us tonight and sharing your research, as well as graciously answering all the questions. I know everyone really enjoyed the presentation. I know I did. And so thank you again so very much. A couple of weeks ago, Norman Daysinger Jr. was our guest, and we appreciate his regular contributions and willingness to provide presentations. And so we wanted to remind you of a tour that he has coming up this summer as part of Blue and Gray Education Society's new Civil War 101 series. July 8th through the 10th, 2022, he will be doing a very interesting tour of Chickamauga. Everything you always wanted to know about the Battle of Chickamauga in a weekend. So they are already taking names. I don't know if you can actually do the full registration, but you can certainly get on the list. And I know that that's something that I want to do. I'm really interested in Chickamauga, and I know Mr. Daysinger is an excellent tour guide. So if you're interested in the area, or even if you're not in the area, I mean, it'd definitely be worth your time. Now, our guest last week was Meg Groening, and she's the author of First Fallen, The Life of Colonel Elmer Ellsworth, the North's first Civil War hero. And if you haven't pre-purchased your copy of her book yet, we hear from reliable sources that it will ship from Savas Beatty by the end of the month. So you can go ahead and pre-order your copy or order one for someone for a Christmas gift. You can always just take a picture of the book, put it in a box and wrap it up. And then, when it gets there, you can give them the book. And be sure when you order to take advantage of the 20% discount through the Savas Beatty website and use the link savasbeatty.com/ref equal Civil War Talk. And then at checkout, you can add the code that Tina is typing in the chat box to receive the 20% discount. And the discount is good for your entire purchase. And a few weeks ago, we had Dr. Alexander Racino on and talking about his brand new book, There, Maryland, the Army of Northern Virginia from the Potomac crossing to Sharpsburg in September 1862. So if you haven't ordered that book yet, you could add that to your order as well. And as a matter of fact, just do all your Christmas shopping at Savas Beatty and use the 20% code for your entire order. Again, we want to thank Laura for giving us such an informative and enjoyable presentation. And we'll be taking a break for the holidays, but we'll be back on January the 5th. And at that time, we'll feature Dr. Brian Still Wills, and he'll be talking about two of his latest books, Inglorious Passages, Non-Combat Deaths in the American Civil War, and the biography of Confederate General William Dorsey Pender, The Hope of Glory. And then on January the 12th, we have Craig Swain lined up to talk about field artillery tactics of the Civil War. And Craig is the author of and the genius behind a fantastic blog called To the Sound of the Guns. And so you won't want to miss that. So we hope that you'll all be back and join us after the holidays, because we already have this great lineup for you. And we've got people lined up into February, I believe, maybe even into March now. And so starting January the 5th, we'll be back with Dr. Brian Still Wills. And we thank you again for joining us tonight. And we want to wish everybody happy holidays and look forward to seeing you in the new year on January 5th, 2022 at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. Y'all have a great night. Thank you.